welcome to History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I am honored to be joined by Rhys Bowen, author of Mrs. Endicott's Splendid Adventure. Rhys, hi.
Hello, how are you, Colin?
I'm excellent. Let's dive right into this novel. Who is Ellie Endicott, and what are the circumstances that she finds herself in?
Ellie Endicott, we're in the year 1938 when the book starts. Ellie Endicott has been the perfect wife for 30 years. She's married to quite a rich banker. She's raised two sons and she's kept his house splendidly and she's entertained his business associates and she's done everything a wife should have done. So she's completely blindsided when he announces he wants a divorce, he wants to marry a younger woman. And he expects her to go away quietly and he'll buy her a little cottage somewhere and she'll do good deeds at church and keep cats. And finally, she finds some spunk and decides that's not what she wants. So she steals his beloved Bentley and with two other women whom society has sort of cast aside, they drive together to the south of France, where she finds an abandoned villa and creates a whole new life for herself. So that's the basis of the story.
And what year is it? Because there's obviously a lot going on historically. So what is the historical setting?
Yeah, so 1938, we're at a time when Hitler has risen to power. We know the Nazis are gearing up for some sort of war. Um, uh, Neville Chamberlain has been to meet Hitler and came back and declared peace in our time, has let Hitler march into Czechoslovakia and not done anything. So we're at that stage right before we know that war is inevitable. And of course, as the book goes on, war does become inevitable. And we take the story right through the war and afterwards. So we see the good, the bad, and the ugly in the story.
So let's talk about where Ellie, Mrs. Endicott, ends up. Saint Bennet. Tell us about this setting and why you decided to use that as the main place for this novel.
Well, I wanted her to find a place that was not, an iconic place like Saint-Tropez or somewhere on the south of France. I wanted a little unspoiled village. I know the south of France well. I'm there quite often. And Saint-Benet is actually, as I imagined that the town of Cassis would be. Cassis is just outside Marseille, and everything about the area is exactly as I've described it, exactly as it would have been before tourists, with the fishing boats in the harbour and the houses around the harbour, just its own little world. I wanted her to find a place that was really unspoiled, where she could be part of it and feel that she belonged and actually make a difference to it. So, that's why I chose. And also, um, to spend 6 months vicariously on the south of France is very nice for me. I look at my own photos of the places because right before I wrote the book, I went back there just to check on what the cheese stalls look like now and what the bistros on the front are serving these days and things. So just the feeling and everything. And your memories are not always correct. As we drove down into Cassis, I said I knew I described it as the olive groves and the vineyards and everything. Many more pine trees than I'd remembered. Like there are pine trees and they're the umbrella pines, not the sort of pine trees that you get in Minnesota, but the umbrella pines you get in the South. And I hadn't realized how many of them there were. So, things like that made me put little details into the description that I hadn't remembered.
You mentioned her friends who were cast aside. You mentioned her finding this community in now I can't pronounce the name of the city correctly.
And Monet.
Saint
Sad.
Benet.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the power of community in this novel and what role that serves in the storytelling?
Oh, yes. I think the bonding between the women is the glue that holds this story together. Um, Ellie, as a wife, has been part of the furniture for her husband. She's been something that makes his life run smoothly, and he doesn't really appreciate her in any way. And she hasn't really had her own life at all. She's lived his life for 30 years. And so taking these two women, first of all, there's Dora, who's the aristocratic, crotchety, bad-tempered old spinster who Ellie would never have thought of taking with her, except Dora says that she's been told by her doctor she doesn't have long to live, and she would love just to see the Mediterranean once more. So Ellie can't really say no. And then there's her lovely cleaning lady, Mavis, who clearly is with an abusive husband, and the abuse has got worse and worse. So taking them along, Ellie would not have chosen to do that, but it has become the great saving grace of her life because these three women become sisters. They become the bond for each other. And so you've got that bond, and then you've got the bigger bond now of community, of belonging to that community, the people there, the friendships she makes, the closeness to other people there really gives her this complete circle within circle of belonging, which is what she never had before.
So it's clear you've got a lot of really great character development, but I come at historical fiction originally as a historian. So I'm curious just how much research went into the historical context for this novel. How deep did you have to go to kind of figure out the day to day of what was happening in that region at that time?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do very good research for everything because obviously these are fictitious characters. In this case, it's a fictitious village, but it's based on a real one. And so I studied the whole of what was World War II like for France. I'd written a book called The Paris Assignment, so I was very well up on what it was like for people in the northern zone of France. But this, they drew a line across the middle of France when the Germans invaded, and this was the free zone, the zone libre. And so there were no German army people there. They did put their puppets in to govern, but this was the place with less industry, etc., therefore not as valuable to them. So they didn't march in there until 1943. And the Jewish population there was safe until 1943. And then everything changed. The German army came in, they rounded up the Jews. So I read exactly the time. I had a timeline for what happened in Marseille, which is only 10 miles away. And uh, and what happened in Marseille and when Jewish people had to wear a yellow star, when the Germans actually came in and occupied the area, and uh, that whole thing. Ellie becomes involved in helping smuggle Jewish men out, first of all, to a monastery on an island. And I should explain there really is a monastery on an island. It's further along the coast, but for my book, I moved it conveniently closer. Um, but they really did, there was a thing to smuggle out Jewish men to get them to Corsica, which was occupied by the Italians and therefore not quite as strict. And then from there, maybe get them to Spain or somewhere, Malta, somewhere. So this really did happen, and Ellie, I made my main character become involved in it. So yeah, I think some of my books, I mean, this is not uh, such a strictly historical novel as some of my other books have been, but I'm always very conscious of real history, what was really happening on that particular day. So, I do my homework very well on that.
I get the impression that you're very organized. Can you talk a little bit about your process of organizing that research and then doing the character development and putting it all together into a readable story narrative?
Yeah. Well, I should point out to start with, I do two and a bit books a year. So am one of these, as you can tell from this book, is 400 and something pages. I have to work really hard and I have to be organized. I get up every day and I sit at my computer, and the first thing I do is to go through and polish what I've written the day before. And then I write 1,500 words, and I'm not allowed to stop until I've done 1,500 words. So that way I get through my first draft. But before I even start, I do my background reading. I read up on what Marseille was doing during the war, when when the Germans occupied, when there was the Battle of Marseille and the Americans came and all, all that sort of thing. So I've got all my details and facts. I have a big whiteboard in front of me and I have everything, all my dates and everything written on that. Um, and then I go through till I've done a first draft, and then I give it to a couple of people who are my primary readers, and they give me good feedback. And then it goes to my agent who reads it, and then I do another whole polish and go through and polish it again. And that's what I do for all of my books.
Well, it sounds like you've got it down to a routine.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
you mentioned some of the people you work with, the dedication in this novel. You talk about the people you work with at Lake Union. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that relationship?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a wonderful editor. She has simply since I finished this has moved on to other things, which is a shame, but I now have a really nice new editor. And I've done this is now my 10th book, I think, with Lake Union. Uh, and I had done two mystery series, historical mystery series, one with Penguin and one with Macmillan. Both of those I'm still continuing with, love them both. But I had ideas that didn't fit into a series. When you've got series characters, a place, and everything, you can't sort of branch out. And I had different ideas I wanted to explore. So I wrote a sort of a, I wrote a proposal for a book about World War II, and my publishers were not interested in it. They said, "Oh no, it's too far from her brand. No, we don't want to do that." So my agent said, "I know someone who is a big fan of yours," and that turned out to be Danielle Marshall at Lake Union. And working with her was an absolute joy. She would send me emails that started, "My dear goddess," so who can not love that? But anything I wanted to write, I mean, suddenly as an author to be given this scope, I'd say to her, "I'd really like to write a book about a British airman who crashes in Tuscany and is hidden in a cave by a local woman." And she'd go, "Brilliant, yes." And then I'd say, "Really like to write a book about little girls who get on a train to be evacuated in World War II and are never seen again." She'd go, "Oh yes, wonderful." So literally, I'm trying. You'll notice the theme is a lot of these books center around World War II. In fact, most of them have centered around World War II. And I think I became very passionate about that because um, I felt it was the last time we had a clear sense of good and evil. Also, because until recently, the role of women in World War II was very much overlooked. All the books are about, "Look at me, I escaped from Colditz. I was on a submarine." And it was all what the men did, which was obviously very heroic. But the women were very heroic too. And until then, it really hadn't been highlighted. And it wasn't just the women keeping the home fires burning and doing everything at home. It was women who broke the codes, women who, in my book, The Paris Assignment, were dropped into enemy France to carry messages and help the resistance, and who knew that their chance of survival was 25%. And yet they did it anyway. And so I've been delighted to write these books to highlight this is what the women were doing in World War II. And also now, with the situation in this country, I'm very delighted to um, bring out the parallels so that people can draw conclusions and parallels for themselves.
Well, since you mentioned that, maybe we can talk a little bit more about that because one of the most valuable elements of historical fiction is the way it makes the past relatable to today. Can you talk about that value that your books offer in helping us to see ourselves within the context of history?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't set out to be didactic. I set out to tell a good story. And that's first and foremost. But as I'm writing, and especially as I've gone through these World War II books, I see things now, I see a concentration camp in our country. Um, and I see an element of fear. I see some people being branded as the other. And that's exactly what happened in Germany before World War II. Some people were excuse me, Some people were vilified and it were blamed, and the situation was made to be it's their fault that you are not what you should be. And we're getting the same message now, and I'm very worried about that. So any little thing that my books achieve in that make people think for themselves, I think that's what I'd like. I'd like people to not look at any sort of media. If anyone reads this book, to say, oh, you know, or to read any of my books, to say, oh, well, this was a bad thing. We can't let this happen again.
Well, I think that's extremely valuable, and I just applaud you for telling these stories and helping people to think critically about today and what's going on in our country and across the world, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Uh, can you talk a little bit about your career? You're sitting in front of a bookshelf, and all those books appear to have your name on them. It takes a lot of work to put together all those stories. Can you talk about where you started and where you are now? And did you ever imagine the type of success that you've had?
Well, I'm an overnight success after 40 something years. Yeah, I've had a very I've had a lot of luck in, you know, writing. You can write a brilliant book and that's all you can do. And the rest is luck, really. You know, if it comes out at the right time and seen by the right people, it does really well. And if it comes out at the wrong time, it can be buried. So, you know, I quite appreciate that, and I appreciate I've had a lot of luck. I've been a professional writer my whole life. I went into BBC in London, and I was in the drama department, and I was a studio manager doing the production side. And I've always written all my life, you know, from the age of 4 onwards, I've written stories, and I think I've created stories for myself to be the heroine all the time I was growing up. Uh, but so I'd be working on a play at the BBC, and I think if I'd written that play, I wouldn't have ended it that way. So I went home and I wrote a play, and with the bravado of a 22-year-old, I walked down the hall to the head of drama, and I said, "Hey, I've written this play." And he called me in a few days later and he said, "Yes, we really like this. We're going to do it." And I've been a professional writer ever since, which I don't think many people can say. So I got lured down to work for Australian television, and while I was in Australia, I met my husband, who's a fellow Brit, who's an aristocratic Brit, and he was on his way to California, so I wound up here. And then, of course, there was nothing like the BBC for me. I didn't want to live in LA and write for Dragnet, you know, so um, I started writing children's books, and I did some picture books, which won awards. And then I got asked to write a teenage novel, and it became very successful. So I found myself on this sort of teenage treadmill for a while, writing books for teenagers, mainly girls. And then finally, I thought to myself, why am I not writing what I like to read? And I've always been a huge fan of mysteries, especially the sort of mystery that takes you to a time and place. That's always been my go-to reading. I like to travel. I've always been a traveler. So a book that lets me travel vicariously is my sort of book. And if it can travel in time as well as space, that's brilliant to me. So I wrote my first mystery series, and that my first one, you have to write about what you know. And my mother's family is Welsh. And so I grew up spending a lot of time in the mountains of North Wales. So I created a police constable who lived up there with all the quirky characters. And those books came out. And I should point out, when we talk about my sort of current success, my first printing of one of those books was 2,500 copies. Now, not many people are going to know about me through that. They're going to be in a few libraries. That was it. So really, I've built my readers one reader at a time, which I'm quite proud of. Um, so the first few books, and then and then I went to Ellis Island, and I just went because I had a free afternoon in New York, and I was completely unprepared for the emotional overload I felt there. You know, I don't have any ancestors that came through Ellis Island, but I just felt, God, you know, these walls were absolutely screaming to me. that they'd seen, they'd seen great joy and great sorrow and great drama. And looking across at Ellis Island, you're standing there and you can see the Manhattan skyline so close, but you're not in New York, you're not in America until the government says you are. You could be sent back at any stage. And so I thought, this is the ultimate locked room mystery. And so I made my heroine, Molly Murphy, flee from Ireland when she accidentally kills the man who's trying to rape her. And he's the landowner's son, and she knows she'll get no justice. And she gets as far as Ellis Island using another woman's name. And when she's on Ellis Island, a murder occurs, and the name she's using shows up as the prime suspect. So that was the driving force behind Murphy's Law, which was the first book in that series that won 4 awards. So won the Agatha for Best Novel that year. So it started that series off very nicely. And so I'm up to book 23 in that series now. So obviously she's still surviving pretty well in New York. And they've become very much historical mysteries. I mean, the mystery is there, but the real history is the important thing. And as the series has gone along, it's focused much more on women's rights at the time, the suffrage movement. The one that comes out next year that I've just finished now is about a woman scientist who's working on the discovery of the polio virus, and all of the papers are published in her husband's name. So, things like this, I'm delighted to bring out in the books. Uh, and then, so I'm writing these series, enjoying them both. And then my editor said to me, "We can't really break you out unless you write me a big dark standalone." And I kept thinking about serial killers and child molesters and terrorists. And then I thought, I don't want to spend 6 months in darkness. What would be the silliest thing that I could possibly write about? And I thought, how about if she's royal, but she's penniless? And it's the 1930s, that delicious time between 2 world wars, when you've got Mrs. Simpson and the Prince of Wales and Noel Coward and all these delicious characters. So I sat down and started writing in the first person. And that stream of consciousness first person is the first chapter of Her Royal Spyness, completely unchanged. So we showed that to my publisher, who went, "Oh no, we didn't want that at all." So that's been the story of my career, actually. So it was put out to bids elsewhere. Someone else, Penguin, snapped it up, and it did really well from day one. It took off and everybody loved it. And book 18, and that is coming out soon. And it's currently got a TV option, which they're developing in England, which we hope will be lovely. And so, gradually the numbers have built up. But then when the first book that came out with Lake Union, that was a completely different ball game. Lake Union is an arm of Amazon Publishing, and they have this tremendous worldwide marketing arm that knows how to market. And so these books, some of them have sold over 1 million copies. So it's it's really rather amazing at this stage in my life, when I should be doing crochet and going to bridge twice a week, that I'm actually flying around the country and speaking and collecting awards and enjoying myself.
Well, congratulations. That's such a wonderful story.
Thank you.
What advice would do you have for someone who's just getting going, trying to sell a first manuscript, not having much success? Like you said, you can write a brilliant book, but there is some luck involved. What advice would you have for them?
Well, for me, with that first book, that first mystery that came out, and I knew I had to get my readers one at a time. So I did everything within my power. I went to speak at any bookstore that would have me. I went to speak to any book club that would have me. I went to conferences, and my husband retired. My first book of these came out in 1997, and my husband retired in 1999, and he said, well, instead of just maybe flying into a city and we'll drive cross country. And so 3 times we did a different route across the US, stopping at little bookstores in the middle of nowhere and introducing myself. Hi, I'm Rhys Bowen, and I've written this book. Do you stock it in your store? Well, this is a little thing about it. You might like to read it. And those built up a relationship with those stores. And some of those first book signings, I did a signing at a store would have the store owner and her friend and one other person who just wandered in. And that would be the book signing. And now I've done book signings where they've actually had to rent a hall outside the bookstore because there isn't enough space. So that's the building one person at a time. So um, the other thing is, all you can do as a beginning writer is write the very best book of which you're capable. Everything else is out of your hands. And the other thing I often say, I speak to fledgling writers quite a lot, is don't ever write anything because you think it's popular and you think it will sell. Because by the time you've gone through an agent and the agent has managed to place it somewhere, that particular trend will be long gone. And if, oh, vampires are really hot right now, I'm going to write a sleuth who's a vampire. By the time it gets to the public will have tired of vampires. So every book I have written is a book I want to read, but it's not on the shelf. So I have to write it to put it on that shelf. But that's the only criteria I can work on. I'd love to be able to read this story. Why hasn't somebody written it? I'm going to write it. That's all I can do.
Well, that's great advice. What's on your schedule next? Do you have some events lined up?
Uh, I've got one of these almost every day for about the next 3 weeks. So it's funny. I mean, luckily, I'm only doing one a day. Sometimes in my past, I've done 3 Zooms in one day, and I've come upstairs and said to my husband, "My cheeks hurt." Because as you know, when you're on camera, you cannot look grumpy.
Mhm.
Well, like this, you look grumpy, so you have to look intelligent and engaged the whole time. And if you do that for 3 hours in a row, your cheeks hurt. So no, I've got several of these. I'm only doing one live event for this because most of the stuff is online marketing. They place my ads and interviews and things all over the place. But I'm doing an awful lot of podcasts and an awful lot of Zooms and some remote TV interviews and things like that. So I've got a lot of those lined up. But I have to confess that this week I'm escaping to Hawaii for 5 days first. I've actually got one of these but that's the nice thing about Zooms. I'll be somewhere else, and I was in San Diego last week and did a Zoom, and
Mhm.
nobody knows that I've escaped. They think I'm
Yeah.
at the office.
Ironically, the intern that works for me, flying to Hawaii today. It's for her school. She does geology, so she's going to start study lava. So that's pretty
I
interesting.
plan to study no lava at all. I plan to study beaches and oceans and mai tais. So that's my plan.
Well, Reese, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Congratulations on all your success, and of course, Mrs. Endicott's splendid adventure. I'm glad that we can share it with our audience here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed the chat. Let's do it next time there's a new book out.
Definitely.
Good. Okay, thanks. And thanks everybody. Bye.